Hey, welcome to another episode of Cloud Unplugged. My guest today is Rafe Colburn, the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Depop. In this episode, Rafe and I talk about what the CPTO role means in a company like Depop, when it makes sense to have one, and how him being the VP of Engineering at Etsy helps him avoid some of the pitfalls of measuring engineering productivity. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode and enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. Great to have you on. It would be really good just to hear a bit about yourself and your background and the role you're doing, and then we'll probably start talking about your role and how that's come about and dig into that, and then probably developer productivity, which is something we were speaking about, and then just see where the conversation takes us.
Great. Exciting. So yeah, I'll start at the beginning but go fast. So yeah, I've probably been building things on the web online, for close to 3 decades. I started in 1995. I briefly worked for Netscape, the company that made the web browser. And then we can fast forward, did a bunch of web development and app development stuff. And then I started working at Etsy in 2012 and started their data engineering team, which I did for 5 or 6 years. And then from there moved into product engineering and kind of moved up along the way. So, manager, senior manager, director. And then, probably 9 years in, I was a VP of engineering and I worked on marketing technology, and we have an ad product that I managed and a couple of other teams. And Etsy bought Depop. So that was July 2021. And then not long after the acquisition, they asked me and 3 other people who worked at Etsy to kind of consult with Depop part-time to kind of look at their annual plan for the next year, help out, maybe give them some ideas. It's a similar kind of marketplace about things that drove growth for Etsy. And probably a few months into doing that, I was asked to take over as Chief Product Officer and moved to London. I had lived in New York. So I came over as Chief Product Officer for, about a year. Depop's CEO left. Our CEO came over. She was the Chief Product Officer of Etsy. And then a few months after she started, our CTO had to leave for personal reasons, nothing bad. And she asked me to take over as Chief Product and Technology Officer. And so that's what I've been doing for the bulk of this year is that combined role.
And how are you finding the role? Because it's quite unusual. I mean, we were speaking about this before on you don't see many companies combine the role.
Yep.
Obviously, you normally have the what and the how are normally separated out.
Yep.
Somebody kind of defines the what, Chief Product Officer. The how that's going to then be done technically is then kind of split underneath.
Yep.
Have you found it? Does it work?
Yeah,
Is it working well?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's a product of circumstance in many ways. I'd known our CEO for a long time, and of course, the other weird piece about it maybe was that even though I came over as Chief Product Officer for Depop, I'd worked in engineering essentially my whole career. I'd done product-y things. I'd been a consultant before and done some other things, but I'd never been a proper product manager. And so because my background was really technical, when our CTO left, it wasn't a weird idea for me to take over the CTO role. Yeah. The weirder part was probably me being the Chief Product Officer alone for a year. And I think overall, your question was, does it work? I think so. I think it. I really enjoy it. It's fun to kind of get to wear both hats. There are so many problems that happen at the intersection of engineering and product, and so sort of getting to work those out in my head has been nice and interesting. I think one of the first things I realized when I took on the role was, those problems that happen at the intersection. What really limited our ability to engage with them was the sort of amount of time that I spent with the CTO. We had a one-on-one every week of an hour. We had a list of things to talk about, and everything that wasn't on that list that involved product and engineering, we just never worked on together because it never made it onto the list. And so I can at least think about all the product and engineering things, which I think can be a lot at times, but having sort of one master list of priorities, I think is good.
When the roles were kind of split and you were obviously basically working on product and working on the technology side.
Yeah.
And in some ways you're kind of looking at your laundry lists of constraints and needs from both sides. since you've joined, like, since you can see both sides now of on your own account, as in you can ask questions maybe that you might not have thought to even ask.
Yes, yeah.
Because you weren't owning that space. So the amount of cognitive effort you might spend on it when it's not yours is probably less. Whereas now it's your space.
Right.
You've got to think about things a lot because you're like, okay, I really need to like own this now. I need to take accountability for it. Has that raised a lot more? I guess strategic decision making that's kind of changed once you started to own it, where you're like, actually now I can prioritize things differently to maybe how we were. And
I think yes, for sure. And it's really funny actually. Our old CTO also was from Etsy, and we had worked together kind of as peers for a long time, probably 4 or 5 years. And so when he came over as CTO, I really tried to stay in my lane. Like I sort of like cultivated a disinterest in what was going on in engineering, just because I didn't want to be that super annoying person who's like, I was talking to one of your reports the other day, and they said that we're doing this with whatever, but the database, I don't think I would do it that way. Just like, that's not a fun job for him. And so I had sort of, sort of intentionally like put on the blinders and said, I'm really going to focus on product. Of course, the other side is I had not been a CPO before, and I felt like one of the failure modes is I get distracted by engineering and I don't focus on being a good CPO. But for sure, once once he left and I took over both sides of it, the floodgates definitely opened, and it's like, okay, it is that constraint thing, which is like, what's the constraint that's keeping us from achieving what we need to achieve? Is it a kind of engineering constraint? Is it an org structure constraint? Is it a like product goals constraint? And so I think, it is fun to kind of get to look at the whole set and say, what's the, what is the big priority for us, and how do we get people to work together to kind of like to kind of make progress on whatever the kind of biggest impediments or the biggest opportunities are.
And when you were, because I guess especially for the business you're in, the data side is going to drive decision making, or should at least inform direction. When you're obviously the chief product officer, there's then once you realize like what it is you're trying to do, then you're also then stretching into the engineering mind of like, but how do we know I've been successful with this? And then you get into the data side, like, well, what's going to tell me that? And then you get into the technology aspect of, well, what can even tell me that, right? So,
right.
Is that enforced kind of like strategic technological decisions being made by yourself and being involved in that, or like, I don't know, the data warehousing aspect, or where the data's going and all those types of things. Has that been a part of it or not? Or
it's funny. I think one thing's for sure, that I sort of think of everything like an engineer, like whether it's the org structure or, it's like they're all systems. Does the system work well together? What are the kind of like bugs in the system that keep things from happening? And I try and take a dispassionate view of the product in some ways. I am passionate about the product, but, I try and be very objective about, does it work or not? Can we measure whether it works? Totally agree with that. And like, I do think it's like very engineer brain, or analytical brain. I think, and it's funny. One of the things there was one thing that was really hard for me when I got to Depop, both as CPO and even into the CPTO role, and that was, I think it turns out in an organization, data engineering is really an important function, and I think I knew that when I ran it, but I really found out when I didn't anymore when I moved to another company, because my team, my data engineering team, was the first real data engineering team Etsy had. Like, we built so many of the foundational systems that Etsy uses for analytics or for business reporting or for some of these other things. And so for really my entire time, like, I could look at any graph and say, I know exactly where that data comes from, and I know what the flaws with it are or whatever else. And I went to Depop and everything's built differently. I didn't know it. And like, I would look at a dashboard and Looker and I'd be like, is this data right? Where did it come from? How do I know? What are the typical problems with this data? And so that was actually a hard part. Not, I think two things. One, not necessarily always having confidence in the data, and the other was not really knowing how to gain confidence in the data. Because the other thing is, like, I could go in the data warehouse myself at Etsy and like run my own queries, but of course to do that at Depop and like learning how to do that would not have been, I think, the best use of my time. And so yeah, for sure, that was a big change for me. And so even now, and I think now the risk is like, I want these things to be good, but they don't have to fit my mental model of good. Of course, my bias would be just build it like I like it. but it just has to work. It doesn't have to work exactly the way I would like or expect.
And so when you were taking, I guess, with the Depop element and then the new role, and all the different, I guess, tooling choices and what you'd inherited, and did you just kind of leave things be and you're just like, okay, we're kind of like just two separate businesses and that's fine?
Yep.
Or is it like, have you tried to integrate?
No, I know what you're saying. Like, so the good news, I think, for us at least, is there's kind of no pressure from Etsy to make things consistent. And so much so that Etsy runs on Google Cloud, Depop runs on AWS. And so that's a big separation right there. And then, Etsy has a very, very monolithic architecture for its core systems, even now, kind of famously so. Depop has mostly a microservices architecture, although we do have an old like monolithic application that a lot of the key data is still in. And so I sort of felt no real urge to make it more Etsy-like.
Yeah.
Because there are many great things about Etsy, but like Etsy has been on path A and Depop has been on path B, and trying to like shove everything onto path A would be a big waste of time. And then even beyond that,
did you not find though it like accidentally biasing for things you knew? I guess because when you like you were just saying before in the example, you're like, you know how to get an answer to something.
Yep.
Because you understand like what's been built and why it's been.
Yeah.
You've got the context of the why.
Yeah.
Behind what's there, and then you've kind of inherited something else, and you don't know why it's been built the way that it is, or why those things are there, and then obviously you might bias and be like, well, this just isn't acceptable. Like it needs to be more like this. Do you know what I mean?
No, for sure. I think. I'm sure that creeps in. I try not to let it creep in, but it for sure does. And I think probably the place where it might intrude the most is where we're missing a capability that Etsy has.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, why don't we have this capability? Etsy had this capability, and the other thing is like, I've had people start from other companies before, and all they talk about is their old company. And so I also just almost have like a little alarm that goes off in my head every time I start a sentence with "at Etsy." At Etsy we track these metrics this way. At Etsy we, our whatever, we use Kafka for this. At Etsy blah blah blah, and like nobody really cares, And so I need to make a, people. Unfortunately, no one has really gotten mad at me about it, but I do try and avoid it, and I do hear myself saying it. So
you're watching the eye roll.
yeah. That's right. I'm allowed one sentence, a long story about Etsy. It's just like, why is this guy talking about this again? Yeah, absolutely.
And how did you find then the shift from engineering into product, and then now product back into engineering? Because the skills you learned, did you have like designers and researchers and things like that as part of the team when you were in product as well?
Yeah. Oh yeah. The whole 9 yards. Yeah. I think
because that's a shift, isn't it?
It really is a shift. And I think. User researchers, product marketing managers, which it's funny, like that, actually the one that was the hardest for me was product marketing. I didn't even know what they did. I'd worked with a few product marketers at Etsy, and actually it's a great role. I'm surprised like many CEOs don't come from that role. It's really, really a good one. But I was like, boy, I need to learn about this. I think, one thing that helped me out was having a good background in analytics and that sort of thing. And so like, that was a place where like, at least I understand how to do goal setting for product. The other thing that helped me out a little bit was, I sort of showed up right at the end of their annual planning cycle. And so I didn't have to run annual planning as a brand new CPO and take everybody through it. I could say like, okay, you have your Q1 plans and your plans for the year, and I'm not going to fiddle with them too much while I get to know everybody and figure out what we're doing. Maybe two other things. The other one was, we had another person from Etsy. Her name's Sonia. She was just coming off parental leave, and Kruti, who's now our CEO, but was our CPO at Etsy at the time, said, "Hey, do you want her to like help you out at Depop for a few months?" She's not assigned to a team because she's just coming off parental leave or whatever, and very, very experienced PM. And she was just incredibly helpful. I kind of brought her in as the PM coach, helped coach the team, helped coach me on product stuff. I was super transparent about that. And so just having that second set of eyes who could, talk about our processes and help me figure out what was going on. She wound up coming over full time, which is great. But in those early days, it was really nice to have somebody who could be a little bit of an independent voice and like tell me if what I was saying actually made sense, and be honest about it. So I think all that was really good. And I think the last one that sort of made it not kind of a big joke to be CPO was I was just always a very product-minded engineering leader. Like, I think that maybe comes from working in infrastructure and sort of having to wear both hats where, okay, what capabilities do we need to build in data engineering? Like, who's the product manager? Sort of me. You don't need to warehouse data this way or that way. And so, I really cared about the product goals and I wanted to understand them. And so it wasn't like, I was never that like, just tell me what we need to build engineering leader. I was always kind of why this, not that. Is it really going to work? So,
yeah, actually, the like product and product marketing, I kind of feel like almost, especially from your background from engineering, they're like the data behind marketing, which is really like quite important. Like, are the things is quite similar in some ways to product, and like are the things I'm doing even working?
Yeah.
But then the empathy for the customer, like the persona, the language you're using, how do they speak about this problem? How do they identify that problem? Because you were doing products, I imagine wasn't massive in the end. I don't know, I'm speaking on your behalf. Did you find it, like once you wrapped your head around it all and understood the role, did you find it more naturally fitting because you had all those other things there? Or was it still a bit like...
I think, the thing I liked about it when I got into it, and I didn't realize until I started, was I think, when you, like by the time I was a VP of engineering at Etsy, like generally what would happen is, I moved around a fair amount to teams, across different teams for my last couple of years there. And generally what would happen is I'd need to be really hands-on on certain teams that were struggling, get things sorted out, set good goals, figure out what we need to do to succeed, hire a director, get the director to set up for success. And they kind of ran on its own, and when you're in that state where you kind of have your directors or whichever level in place and it kind of runs on its own, what I found is like, boy, engineering management is really about management. We have 14 roles to fill across these 5 teams. Can we do the recruiting thing? We have, 20 engineering managers across all my teams. Are they all doing a good job? Like, have to work with HR. And I think it can be true for CTOs as well. A lot of times engineering is the biggest group at a tech company. Yeah. And so a lot of it is just all of that stuff. And so getting into product is like, boy, what are we going to build? Is like every single level of product, you're still engaged in that kind of more almost individual contributor type role where you're trying to figure out.
The creative side, like the ideation part.
Yeah.
So you still felt like you were contributing value in the process of creating something.
Yeah, and it was just kind of fun to go back and like say, okay, what do our customers need? What can we really build? I think in engineering management, sometimes you can get away from that a little bit. And so that was a fun part of being in product. And of course, like if you can pull it off in product as an engineer, it's fun because you do know how things get built. Like a lot of times I think the hard part for product managers is like, is this easy or hard? I don't know. Let's talk to an engineer, but I kind of know at least for most things. So
you'll know the right questions to ask.
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose to like get a measure of like, should that really take that long? That seems really long.
Right.
Yeah.
Or what if we just did this other thing instead? Oh, that takes half as long. Great. Yeah. Well, let's do the other thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a massive advantage. And then we actually mentioned we're obviously chatting before about like the risk, I suppose, of joining the roles. Would you what types of companies would you expect to find this role in? Like a joint chief product and technological officer? I don't know how you want to approach it, but I guess there's the trust and risk of the business. Yeah. And then there's the aptitude and the understanding of the business to become that role.
Yep. So maybe let's talk about a little bit of those things. I think one thing is, to the extent that I'm successful in this role, probably one of the biggest reasons is, Depop is very similar to Etsy in terms of it's a consumer marketplace, lots of small sellers, and I was in that business for 10 years. And so I have a lot of domain knowledge of that kind of business. Yeah. I think if someone said, hey, do you want to be the CPTO of a SaaS company that does something completely different? It probably would be really hard because, when you know what kind of product it is, it's a little bit easier to be a product manager than coming in cold and not knowing the product space. So I think that probably is a factor. I think, going to the like risk side, it's kind of like imagine being a CEO and you say, boy, I'm going to hire this person and, we're a tech company and, what we build determines our success as a business. And so I'm going to put one person in charge of all of it. Like that. I think to any CEO that would feel really risky. And so I think a lot of times, maybe I was telling you earlier, like I think you see it happen at either struggling companies. So it's like, boy, we need one person to fix it. Let's put them in charge of all of it. I've seen that.
Yeah, faster decision making, autonomy.
Exactly.
You're like, actually,
it's like it's an emergency. We need one person in charge in an emergency
and get things done.
Yeah, and so I think that's one. I think the other one is that sort of like job for a co-founder or really long-time employee kind of case. You're kind of a lifer and you know the business really well. And I think in my case it was maybe a little bit of an emergency situation, since that we really wanted to grow. We wanted to streamline things. I had already been there. Do you say, okay, we're gonna go hire a new CTO? That'll take months. They're going to come in, they're going to have ideas, they're going to do things a certain way. Okay, well, internalizing and ingesting all their ideas is going to take months, and then maybe we'll do what we need to do. And so I think having been there for a year and having had an engineering background, I think in this particular case to our CEO, it looked like the lower risk approach. I already kind of know the job and I know the business, and so why go through that long process of bringing a new person on? I think on the risk side, of course, is, when you have one person who has both of these jobs, if they leave, it's a little stressful because, unless there's an amazing succession plan, because then you have to like fill both of these jobs at one time, or hire another CPTO, which is also like harder, which would be harder. So I think that's why it's not common. Like, I think the benefits, if you have the right person for it, are high because it streamlines a lot of things. But boy, it takes, I think, a fair amount of trust on a number of vectors to really do it. You know?
Definitely. And then the hiring, I guess, for yourself to find other leaders around you to lead on behalf of you. Like, how have you managed that? And from my experience, I think when you're close to the doing, and you're more attached to the execution, it's in some ways easier. Because you see directly exactly what people are executing on. The more that starts to roll away, and you can't really quantify like how people are going about it, and you then set the goals. Then you need to have trust that the people in those roles can actually organize people successfully underneath them, right? Get them to execute really well and measure the right things and set expectations and make sure they're very clear and make sure the metrics are very clear of what we're all looking at. And those qualities are quite hard to find, and the experience is hard to find. Have you found it challenging generally, or do you think that the culture you're already within fostered that already and you had a lot of that defined?
I'm a great believer in developing internal talent. And so, I really have to be kind of hard pressed to hire somebody from outside in one of those leadership roles, just because I think, people internally, one, I'll say I've been a huge beneficiary of that. I started at Etsy originally as an individual contributor. Here I am a long time later, and I'm the CPTO of Depop, a company we bought. Like, that's because Etsy chose to invest in it's an internal people. At any point they could have said, boy, we just need someone from outside for this job. And that would have been, I would have been stuck a little bit. So I think, and a lot of people at Etsy kind of benefited in that way. And so I feel the same way. You get to know people, their capabilities, even if they don't have every single thing they need for the job, you kind of know how to support them because you've been working with them. And so, I think really, I'm going to try and make sure I'm saying something true. I think the only person I really hired that was sort of at that kind of director, one level down from me level from outside, is our director of design and research. We just didn't have any internal candidates that were senior enough to step up into that role. And so she's great, fantastic. I think, has brought a lot of new, fresh perspectives to the team. But by and large, I'm a person who says, boy, if we've got someone internally who we really think can do the job, we do that. So it's been a lot of internal promotion and kind of seeing who was the most promising and then kind of betting on internal people. And, like that kind of thing about, can they lead other people? Are they really like a person who has kind of the right model of accountability, but also creates empowers their people and some of those other things.
That's good, really, because I think, well, great for people like coming into the company. But I do think there's definitely something in when you're working with them, I guess either consciously or subconsciously, you start to get to know their strengths. Yeah. And you observe, I suppose, over time, like how good they are at communicating, or, how good they are at setting direction for people, whether they were even if they weren't responsible for doing so. You'll see individuals start to take ownership, and you then see that they've got things in them or they're learning things for themselves. If you hire externally, you've got to somehow do that in an interview process.
Yeah, which is a small sample
It's a
size.
really small sample size, very small time element,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And and it's only really then when you actually get to work with them, as good as hiring might be, and the good as and maybe this is like reflection of just me not knowing really good hiring processes. Maybe there are ones out there, but I do think it's really hard.
But all of them are pretty iffy, I think. It's just not a lot of time. You spend a year with someone versus spending a day with them. It's just, or an hour, like you might only talk to them for an hour. It's hard. And I think, I would say probably the single most important determinant of success for people is, can they respond to feedback? Can they take on feedback and use it productively and stuff like that? And this is a thing that's really hard to learn in an interview. You learn it by working with someone. No one goes to an interview and says, boy, I don't listen to feedback and I'm going to get mad at you if you tell me I could do things better. Yeah. You find that out the hard way once you've hired them. You find that out over time really working with people. And so, I think if you have people on your team and they're promising and they take on feedback, then okay, you feel safe betting on them that they can do more because they're going to adjust their approach based on feedback if it's not working right. So
yeah, that's very good. How do you do goal structuring then? Is there do you use a framework, OKRs, or is it general KPI system? Have you adopted anything, or do you?
I'm probably not the most structured goals person, but I guess what I am a big believer in, I think it's probably the most important thing for a product team is some kind of North Star metric with a driver tree, and so you say, okay, for a marketplace, it's almost always how much business is transacted in the marketplace. We want to grow the marketplace. Okay, well, what ladders up to that? Do we need to be registering a lot more users? Do we need people to search successfully? You kind of build that whole driver tree up. Next thing down, it's probably something like, average purchase size, number of purchases, or percent of sessions that lead to a purchase in sessions, let's say. Yeah. Then we say, okay, well, then what drives sessions? What drives purchase size? What drives conversion rate or whatever? And then I think that lends itself to not only goal setting, but also people understanding why their goals are what they are, because you can kind of see how they ladder up. So I think that's really important. And then kind of beyond that, I think I like the O's in OKRs. I do think it's important to have measurable objectives, but I think at least by the time I'm in this role, KRs are too detailed for me. If I'm messing with people's KRs, it's too much. And so as long as we have reasonable objectives that kind of ladder down, I can see the squad objectives, the kind of initiative objectives, and then the objectives at my level, the overall product and engineering, it tends to be fine. And then, I'm big on autonomy. And so then it's okay, well, if we know what the driver tree is and we know what you're trying to drive and we know what customer outcomes you're going to work on to help drive those then you can do the goal setting in a finer grain than that in whatever way you want. It's not important to me. So if people want to do it at the director level, it's fine. If they want to do it at the team level, it's fine.
Yeah, I'm curious actually as your roles, at the top in some ways of the tree, how detailed do you get on confidence building, I suppose, on all the things you've just said. Yeah. When you get to kind of the overall goal is so long. Yeah. Right? It's so time bound, right? So it's like a year maybe.
Yep.
So you can't focus on that every day.
Right.
So you need something that you can focus on.
Yeah.
Which is incremental towards the goal.
Yep.
Do you try and do you just assume that people have worked out the incremental elements within the departments, or do you want assurance that they actually have worked out the incrementals because you want to know earlier, and you want to see that when we're kind of reporting up and things like that?
Yeah, it's a complicated question, right? I think, I don't know, sometimes I like to joke around and say I try to keep myself on a starvation diet of status because people put so much work, if you say, boy, I really care about how you report things to me, people spend a lot of work. We don't get paid for status reports. We get paid for making customer-facing changes. Yeah. So I don't ever want to be that distraction where it's boy, the most important thing of my job is how I report to my boss. That's report things to my boss. I think that's bad. And so generally, we launch most things as experiments, which I think is not uncommon in consumer marketplaces. And so I do look at the experiments and kind of think about them. I don't usually talk to people about all the experiments, but I at least kind of look at what's going on to make sure it makes sense. And then we do quarterly planning, and so that's pretty deep. I look at all the we don't have that many squads. We're not a huge company. I look at all the plans at kind of a squad level, and then I give feedback. But and then the plans get finalized, and I barely look at them when they're finalized. I look at the first draft, give my feedback, and then assume that they'll make the right revisions, and we'll find out next quarter if it. And people generally are really good. I think I've had really good luck with autonomy, and so I want I want to make sure that what we're doing goal-wise overall aligns with what we're trying to do for the long term, and have some sense that the quarterly plans are reasonable and look like they'll add up to success. And then mostly beyond that, I kind of trust people to either do things that make sense or kind of reach out to me. I try to be super available, and so if people are like, boy, I don't know if what we're going to do works, like I like to be asked. But
you want to be wanted, I suppose.
right. Yeah,
I told you this before. Not needed.
Yeah, I want to be wanted, not needed. Absolutely.
Yeah, if you're needed, there's something going wrong here. Where you're like, okay, this is not working out well.
Yeah, it's a little stressful to be needed.
Yeah, exactly. You're not really setting people up for autonomy. I guess at that point, you're always needed. I was just curious around it though, because I think even for yourself as an individual, like you naturally, when you're trying to work out direction, you in yourself need information as well.
Yep.
So there's a natural need to have data.
Yep.
And you might ask slightly different questions potentially because you're kind of like forecasting out.
Yeah.
Maybe than other people are.
Yeah.
And it's quite challenging to be able to do that when you've got inhibited views. You can't quite see the things you kind of need to see. So it's like, I suppose you can go off and do your own like silent bit of discovery where you're like, I don't want to look like I'm.
Yeah.
I don't want to ask people to like, I need this information, you go and give it to me. But I'm more the need for the information that can kind of inform your direction and strategy that you may be aiming for longer term.
Yeah, no, I think for sure. And I think, we have an analytics team, and we have like a quarterly initiative check-in where we kind of have all the numbers all the way down.
Nice.
We have a sort of system where we launch our experiments into a holdout, or we have a holdout that doesn't see our experiments, and so you can kind of see the sum of everything we do experimentally, how it all impacts things together over a few months. And so there's a lot of signal on kind of like, is our stuff working for sure? And I definitely pay a lot of attention to it.
As you already have that in place, I guess, to then.
Yeah.
So that's already something, you've got something.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I do look at that. I do look at the product analytics data quite a lot. I have a dashboard and some of these other things, and talk to folks about that. And I think it's a little bit different when I work with my direct reports. We talk about like, hey, are the numbers doing what we want to do? How do we think these teams are doing? So there's a lot of like informal chat. I'm a huge one-on-one person. Like I'm a big believer in the kind of ongoing conversation.
And figuring it out together almost.
Yeah, figuring it out together. I talk to the individual PMs a fair amount too, not to like tell them what to do, but just kind of talk about what's going on and hear what their ideas are or whatever. It doesn't seem to annoy them too much. So,
you mentioned before though, when you were taking over the technology side, and obviously that now being the biggest pool of individuals in the organization. And then we kind of, at the beginning of the podcast, I mentioned like productivity, developer productivity.
Yeah.
I don't know the size of, what is the size of developers?
I think there are 150 people in engineering roughly, and probably it's like a quarter of them are managers. So, maybe 100, 110 engineers, something like that.
How have you found that aspect where, in some ways you've got, on one hand, you've got your data, right? You've got like, are the ideas we're coming up with working?
Yes.
How are consumers like interfacing with like some of the new features that we're shipping and on the other hand, you then have like almost like the execution element behind it, which is like, okay, this is completely different in some ways. Or like, how do I understand and measure what's going on over here? Have you put things in place? Is it like, how's it working for you? I guess.
Yeah. So it's really funny. Maybe I'll tell a little story about my first foray into kind of like productivity when I got this job, and this, I kind of took this from Etsy, experiment velocity. Are we running a lot of experiments? Are the teams running them? Like pretty common kind of like product productivity metric or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to run a lot of experiments. I think it's important. And so I got there, and turns out we were using this old kind of internal framework, and you couldn't run that many experiments because it was hard. I was like, okay, but they had already bought Optimizely, and so they were rolling out Optimizely, and I was like, great, let's start using Optimizely. Well, the Optimizely data wasn't right. There was some kind of data quality issue, so Optimizely was all wrong. That took a few months. Then it was people didn't really know how to use Optimizely very well because it was new to them, and so there were all these impediments to just having to really using the tooling,
Yeah.
and so it wasn't a very good metric, and it helped to kind of focus on it because it got us through that whole process. And probably at the end of my first year, we're like, okay, we can really use Optimizely well. We had a new CEO. We're going to set an aggressive experiment velocity goal for the year. And so everybody's like, got it, run lots of experiments. And so we did run lots of experiments, but they weren't great. I mean, some of them were really good. Some of them were just people broke up their project into more smaller things so they could run more experiments because what did I tell them? Run lots of experiments. And it's like, okay, well, this isn't exactly what, and the engineers, I think, completely validly were like, why are we running all these meaningless experiments? They're, hard to clean up and some of these other things. And so on one hand, I would say, boy, that wasn't so great because, it wasn't, I would say it was not like the optimal amount for what we were trying to do. But I think on the other hand, it was a little bit like picking up a new exercise regime. We got the reps in. Yeah. And so at the end of Q1, I was like, we're running plenty of experiments. You don't need to worry about this metric anymore. Let's focus on better hypotheses and some of these other things. And I think I bring that up because, when you talk about these productivity metrics, it's a little bit of a be careful what you ask for situation.
Yeah.
If you tell people you're going to measure something a certain way, they will do their very best to succeed based on this measurement. And so if that measurement doesn't really tie to success, it's a problem. It leads to wasted time. So when I got there, we had Code Climate. Are we naming names? And Code Climate is a perfectly good tool. You can see lots of information in there. But boy, I struggled to get any meaning from it. I could see how many pull requests people made and how long pull requests were open and how many, how much code was new and how much was rewritten and blah, 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 and all those other things. But those turned out to be, that didn't tell me, and I didn't look at the individual engineer level, but it didn't tell me very much about how productive the engineering team was. And I was like, okay. And I think, more recently we've brought in DX, and the survey-based approach I think has worked pretty well. We've kind of hit the target, 90% plus people filling it out. And I know when I first took over as the CTO part of the job, I talked to a bunch of people to say what could we be doing better that would really speed things up. And there's something brittle, certain kind of automated tests were very brittle and it was hard. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is a thing. I know it's a thing. And it showed up in the very first DX survey as the number one thing. And I was like, oh, if we had DX, I wouldn't have had to have all these conversations.
What is DX? Sorry, do you want to?
Oh yeah. Sorry. What is DX? Yeah. So DX is basically, it's almost like an engagement survey or an internal survey tool, but really for developer experience questions. Yeah. So, and I think, a lot of these kind of survey solutions, you write the questions, but the nice thing about DX is they write the questions based on actual research. And so I think it actually unearths things. So so
the data you're going to get back is way more informed because of the line of questioning you're going to ask.
Exactly.
As opposed to you trying to figure out what the right questions are.
Right. Yeah. What should we ask people? Is it easy enough to deploy code into production? They have good questions. And so I think there are two things. One, I think DX is a good product. They have good questions and it's set up well. But I think the other part of it is just in a systemic way asking engineers what would make their jobs better. Yeah. And I think they know, engineers know what makes their job harder than it needs to be. And so really having that discipline of every few months asking people what could be better about their job, the answers are useful. And so I find that,
I'm very curious about that. Actually. Yeah. Because you come from a product background, obviously asking users. So when you're in product, you do ask the users as well as you use the data. So you've got qualitative and quantitative data points. Did you instantly, when you then were looking at technology, did you almost treat it slightly differently just because you were looking at it differently? Or did you actually treat it in the same way naturally where you're just I suppose I need to ask people. That's probably the quickest way to find out.
It's so funny. I think this is where being an engineer doesn't always help me out. Because, I think I have that like I'm suspicious of surveys vibe. I'm like, I don't like surveys. I like looking what millions of people do and graphing their behavior and,
correlating it all.
and run the statistics. And, look, we have a statistically significant proof that when you do this, more people send offers to other people. Like, that's proof. And it's like, well, we could go talk to some people and ask them what makes it hard. And I'm like, yeah, but I can see what millions of people do. Like, that's what counts for me. And I think, it's like, and so like, I do have that a little bit of that bias where it's like, it's not graphable. Maybe it doesn't count. And I think, so it was a little bit of a revelation to me. And I had seen like, probably simpler, less sophisticated systems not provide that much value, the kind of like NPS score, how likely are you to recommend PHP to other developers? Is this really the question? And so I think the combination of like the sort of better survey and then like really having good luck getting very broad participation. The other problem with surveys is not everybody fills them out, but if you've gotten 90+% of people to fill them out, it's
and did you get all that amount of people? Wow, that's really good actually.
And I think the first two times we did it, we really tried very hard as a leadership team to kind of write a report back to the engineering team about what we learned from the survey and action some of the things that they brought up, so they don't immediately feel like, okay, great, we went to the trouble to fill out the survey and it was a big waste of time. So we kind of are trying to make it two-way and show that it really does affect our decision making, but then kind of really demonstrate that it affects our decision making. That's important. So
then have you not put any other systems in place to, like, is it totally qualitative that you will look at, generally speaking, as in that's, well, I suppose even it's not necessarily it has to be the only thing, but it might be the one you prioritize the most.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not quite the only thing, but it's not far from the only thing. I think they do have a kind of data warehouse component to you can look at other things, but I think kind of between the survey and the other kind of planning we do on the engineering side, I think that just about does it. I think. And what it is an answer, I think the big topic that's going around right now is like, how productive are your engineers in aggregate? How productive is engineer A versus engineer B? And, I think our ability to measure that stuff is, really, really, really limited. I think, and I think a lot of that gives people a false sense of security, but it's not really a thing I could go on at length about why I don't think that it is. I remember, I'll maybe tell one short story. I remember when I was a line manager, I was like managing a team of engineers, and I was talking to an engineer. He was like maybe a junior engineer, a mid engineer. And he asked me a question at our one-on-one. We were taking a walk, and he said, "Am I getting better as a programmer?" And I said, I gotta be honest with you, I don't know. Like I don't read all of your pull requests. Yeah. Even if I read them, I would not have the context and the memory to know that you are getting better as a programmer. Yeah. I know I can tell you're getting better at getting things done. Maybe I can tell that you're getting better as a communicator, but at programming, like, that's a tough one. In the end, I said, like, do you think the code you wrote 6 months ago is good? And he was like, not really. And I was like, okay, you're probably getting better as a programmer. That's about as close as I could get. So it just turns out to be, I think not an easy question, and we shouldn't trivialize it,
I do understand. I mean, I can kind of see both sides from, it's like you were saying, there's a high, from a business perspective, it's the majority of the organization,
Yep.
Like,
It's
got a high cost.
Yeah.
To it, so you can understand the incentivization for, like, especially
100%.
From CPTO's perspective, like, how can we maximize?
I mean, if it were a factory and you had a bunch of machines that assembled cars, you'd want to know if all the machines were assembling cars effectively, or if some of the machines were amazing at building cars and some of them were not good. Yeah. Like, this is the unit of work for a for a lot of companies these days, and so the desire to know, I 100% get, but
once you start to measure it, when it gets to productivity, once you've decided on that being the measurement, it's already the wrong measurement.
You know
what I mean? Because then, like you were saying about the experiments, it's once everyone thinks that's what they're getting measured by, it totally shifts.
It's going to distort their behavior.
Yeah, it totally distorts everything. It then becomes a really difficult thing to ever really measure anything in the right sense, other than probably, I do agree, probably asking. And then DORA is reasonably good.
Yep.
Just as like a general,
I think so,
principle to kind of have in place. But I think when you start to get really granular and like pull requests, but then is that quality just because you did more doesn't mean it was better, etc., etc. So I
think it's one of those things where I think maybe it's an 80-20 thing. 80% of it is understanding Dora and 20% of it is measuring it properly. And so change failure rate, is that important? Sure. Do you need to measure it? No, you just need to kind of know that, like, if you have a lot of change failures, you're probably in trouble. Or, ability, how quickly can you get code into production? Really important. As long as it's kind of like fast enough, do you really need to measure it? Maybe if it, because I think even Dora, which I think is really a good framework, some of the metrics are easy to measure, but some of them are pretty hard. You have to put a fair amount of work to really be able to measure them with confidence. I don't know how many people are really doing that.
No, I don't know. Not just out the box. It's not like you just like have the dashboard out the box and you kind of go. And I'm also sometimes, it's hard to quantify the impact anyway and all those things. I think they're very healthy. It means that your team's doing well, generally speaking. Like, you're deploying more frequently. The things you're deploying aren't failing very often. Like, right. As a construct of like a good set of disciplines.
Yep.
It means your teams must be doing something right. But at the same time, the impact to the business on those things is then harder to quantify. And so I don't know if it's the right incentivization. They're good principles to measure because it tells about the quality of what you're doing. But then I think, how do you then measure the impact that those things are really having is then much tougher. Yep. As a business. So
no, I totally agree.
How would you then, because you're bridging two, you might not even have the answer. I'm just going to throw it out there.
No, I'll give it a shot.
I'm just curious, but as you are also defining the direction for product, and therefore you have an understanding of the impact that you want this to have to the business, can you legitimately quantify the impact that the engineers are having in a more quantifiable way in relation to the business?
It's a good question, and I think, yes and no, because for sure, like, I could say, okay, I'll give you an example from my job at Etsy. I managed the ads team. It had probably 20, 25 engineers on it, and ads, you can look at Etsy's financial results. Ads make a big portion of the revenue. And so, I think at one point, the amount of revenue allocated to an engineer on the ads team was like 14 times higher than any other team. And so you'd say, boy, these people, they're really making a lot of money for the company. But the truth is that, like, you could have taken all the engineers off the ads team and taken engineers off of other teams. They also would have made 14 times the money. Now, of course, the people who are on there, they're really, really good engineers on the team. That's nothing about them. But, like, in some ways, engineering is engineering, and it's kind of up to the management how we kind of like allocate the portfolio. Now, maybe in roles, you can say, okay, a data scientist who's really good and makes your search a lot better, more often than not, will create more value than, an engineer in some other role. But the other part of it is like, okay, let's say you have the world's greatest data scientist, but your search systems won't stay up, or you don't have an app or a website to host your search thing on, or all these other things. Like, and so if you really try and do this attribution of revenue to engineers, like, what you wind up is devaluing this work that's like foundational to the whole company. Yeah. And so I try not to play that game too much. I think I tell people,
I was curious to know if there was like a general way that, not necessarily just for the business side, but also for the engineers, because it gives you purposeful. You feel like you've got more purpose.
Yeah.
If you can tangibly see the result of which you've driven, even as a team.
Yep.
And if you know that the business, in truth, like all businesses, the biggest impact you can have is on revenue.
Yeah.
Like, that's like the creme de la creme that matters to a company probably the most, in the end.
Yeah.
Then it is quite motivating if you know you can kind of do it. At the same time, though, what you don't want to do is incentivize it as being the most important.
Right.
To like, oh, this is the most important thing you need to measure. How do we attach what you're doing to this thing? I think that's maybe the wrong motivation.
Yep.
But to get people to feel like, I managed to do that. Like, I had that impact. That's really positive.
Yeah. I think it is hard, and I think by and large, and maybe this goes, like, I'm a very big team person, and so, I think, like, as a team, we all have one growth goal, and everybody contributes their part to it, and it's a portfolio, and so, I understand that some people are working on things that, you don't measure them in GMV, and that's sales basically in a marketplace.
Yeah.
We don't measure that in an A/B test. You're doing these other things, but like it's not inherently less valuable, and it kind of all has to work together. Which I think, because I think kind of the downsides of that, like, I think I want people to be motivated but not internally competitive. I think that's like I'm on the good team that does good things, and I'm on the everyone should want their team to be good and effective. But I think like I've seen too many like painful outcomes from internal competition. People become less cooperative, or they feel like they have to change jobs because they're not on the right team, or blah blah blah. Like these things are all kind of like bad outcomes of that internal competition. And so I think goals and aspiring to like deliver for our customers are really important. I also think at the end of the day, more than driving the numbers, we should be focused on driving great outcomes for whoever our customers are. If you're on a platform team, like you want the product engineers to feel super productive and like they're well supported. And if you work on search, you want people who search to love the search experience. And like a side effect is you get more money. That's great. But I think like we're making a really awesome product, whatever that is.
That's a much better motivator.
Yeah.
The bottom line, 100%. That's great. Obviously, I'm super, super interested. Is there, how do people find out if they want to kind of reach out to kind of pick your brains on things, or like, is there a way to get in touch with you? And
the best one these days surprises me as much as anyone is LinkedIn. I answer my LinkedIn messages and post there fairly regularly.
How would they find your LinkedIn?
Rafe Colburn is my name. You can just search for it. It's a relatively it's a relatively unique name.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It's been great chatting about it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, really a pleasure. I've loved the conversation. Really fun to talk about this stuff.
Cool. All right, thanks for listening. Cheers. Bye.